and one of the victorious junglers.
Thank you very much. I am here with Karsa after qualifying with RNG for the MSI final. Karsa, I just saw you backstage being very nervous, looking at your team to close out that game finally. What does it mean for you to make it to the MSI final with RNG?
就刚刚我们看到你在后台非常紧张的看到你的队友赢最后一场比赛，想问一下你打进决赛对你意味着什么？
这是我人生第一次在这种国际大赛上面打到决赛吧，所以对我来说，对我来说是特一种肯定吧，就觉得自己的努力有回报的感觉。
So, this is the first time that I actually made to final in an international event. It feels like everything I put in, I dedicated, have come back to me.
That it has come back to you. The guys here and the girls are cheering for you, and you say you've worked hard for it. And especially in game 2, you got 2 steals that were so important for your team to close out that game. Can you walk me through that Elder Dragon steal and that Baron steal that were so important for you guys in game 2?
也可以看到你打得非常努力，然后第二把的时候，你抢了2条非常关键的龙，一条远古龙，一条大龙。想问一下你在抢龙的过程中是什么样的？
因为抢龙的话，基本上惩戒都是5-5开的嘛，所以就是队友。就是队友愿意信任我，让我去抢这条大龙，还有就让我去抢这些龙，让我觉得就是感觉是被队友信任吧。
So Smite is always a 50-50 chance. So he's really grateful that his teammates are able to trust him, to give him the confidence to go for the Smite.
All about the team. Karsa, you do take down Fnatic here on their home turf, and even though it was a 3-0, it looked like a very back and forth competitive 3-0. What can you say about the performance of your opponents here today?
我们今天虽然在主场击败了 Fnatic， 而且是3-0，但是也可以看到比赛过程非常忐忑。也想问一下你 Fnatic 这个对局的表现。
我觉得今天2队的表现都比较紧张一点吧。然后我觉得 Fnatic 在前期的表现真的是做的三把都做的蛮好的，就3把在前期都压制了我们。然后就是我觉得赢他们也是我们比较艰辛的就比较难了吧，就做的比较难。
Well, so both teams were playing a bit nervous today. And they give us a lot of early game pressure and be able to, beat us in the early games. But however, he's pretty happy that they were able to come back.
You guys did come back 3-0, fantastic victory. This means you're in the MSI final. How much have you thought about the fact that you might be up against your ex-team, the Flash Wolves, in that final on Sunday?
那你们接下来也要打进决赛了，然后你们有可能会打到你的老东家闪电狼。想问一下，你打到他们你会有什么感受？
因为我之前在有一次采访说我要暴打他们嘛，就这次我觉得我的回答不会变。就我之前不是说要暴打他们吗？然后我的回答不会变。
Alright, so in an interview earlier, he said that he's gonna, beat them pretty badly, and his answer did not change.
All right. Finally, Karsa, you stepped up huge for RNG today, and all the fans have embraced you, also the European fans. Is there anything you want to say to them and all the people that were cheering for you guys?
有什么想对现场的观众、粉丝支持你的人说？
就还是老样子吧，就是谢谢大家愿意支持我，然后我会做得更好，希望能拿到这次决赛的冠军。
So thanks everyone for the support. He'll try to do his best and do better, and hopefully they can get a championship this time.
All right, fantastic. Tons of support for Karsa and for RNG. Thank you very much. Congratulations. Back over to you guys.
Thank you, Shocks. Hearing from Karsa after the longest of our 3 games in this series where Fnatic fought tooth and nail to keep their series hopes alive, but RNG, as they had in the previous 2 games, they found that moment where they could turn it all, take control of the game, and end it in 3 games.
And I really like the language that Papa Smithy used, the inevitable defense from RNG, and the fact that it felt like Fnatic threw everything and the kitchen sink. They were pulling out the Singe, the roaming mid laners, grabbing that Ezreal every single time, but it just wasn't enough to break the only strategy RNG showed today.
Yeah, and if it happens in game 1 where Fnatic gets an early lead and then a few little things go wrong and then lose, you can say it's unlucky. But as soon as it happens 3 games in a row, I think we saw a really unique series here where we probably had the best team at playing with a deficit in RNG and one of the teams that struggles the most to close at MSI in Fnatic. And even though I think they did a great job displaying in the cast how Fnatic was the late game team in Europe, they had switched up and been able to become an early game team, but they never really completed the last part of that strategy. And you could see that it wasn't polished in these games.
Yep, I unfortunately have to agree. Fnatic, they couldn't really bring, I mean, they did bring a different style from what they traditionally did in the European scene. Papa Smithy did say that the only real team that could force them to play that like that was Vitality. But what I think this has shown is that there's still a gap in terms of what you need to be able to bring when it comes to international competition, and I have nothing but praise for the way in which RNG were able to not just win through a standard style, but every single time they saw an opportunity to bounce and answer back against what Fnatic had, they did it perfectly.
Ultimately, I do think that it is just a matter of experience, however, for Fnatic. This is still an incredibly young squad when you look at someone like Caps, who's just now got more international experience underneath his belt, you know, still kind of growing into this superstar mid laner that everyone sees he's going to become. And then you have the top laner, Whippo, you know, playing the back half of the playoffs, coming into his first international event. So, while I understand that Fnatic couldn't measure up this time around, I still think that a 3-0 is going to burn, but they should actually feel fairly confident going back into Europe, recognizing that there's still a lot of ceiling left to hit.
Without a doubt, credit should be extended to Fnatic, but I do want to recognize again for RNG, as Deficio put it, I really like the way he put it, you bite them, they bite back, right? That's how they were playing this game. Every advantage that Fnatic found, RNG was quick to find another one of their own. That's exactly what happens 25 minutes into the game. A 3-0 in favor of RNG.
And what impressed me the most is the number of teleports that we saw from Letme to react to every play that was happening. And that TP there, it was a large punish as Fnatic were trying to collapse down onto the side lane. They tried to use the pressure that Whipper was generating. And unfortunately, because of the quickness that RNG were able to implement in terms of responding, they end up shutting Fnatic down.
Because RNG are just playing in their pocket right now. I've said this again and again. Fnatic remind me so much of Edward Gaming back in the LPL. Very similar power points, very similar style. They like the 5v5. RNG have faced 100 EDGs. They beat them in the final, and it's just if you're going to take it to them, if you're going to try to team fight, that's exactly where they want to be.
Yeah, and I also think it shows in their post-game reactions that they didn't feel challenged. Like, the games would show that Fnatic put up an extremely good fight, and you almost want to say that's the best performance you've seen by a swept team almost ever. But just looking at RNG, Uzi had a little smile on his face, Xiaohu's just kind of looking back and forth. I guess it's over. We play Sunday again, right?
Yeah. Right.
It's almost like they were just warming up, because without actually having their Nexus destroyed in any of those games, they were never under any real threat emotionally.
Again, with full control of the game, it was Fnatic who, again, fighting tooth and nail, tried to mount that base defense. Of course, Reckless coming up with his first pentakill of the only pentakill of the MSI tournament so far, after having one denied from him earlier. This one brought to you by Acer Predator.
Yeah, and just the fact that Reckless had to dig deep here, and it almost looked like the comeback story. I think I've seen this anime several times. I was waiting for the protagonist Reckless to make his debut, and at least he got this moment.
And if they would have been able to take this pentakill and move it to victory, it's when the series really would have gotten interesting, because this was the moment where I think everyone had given up, and it reinvigorated the crowd and pretty much reinvigorated Fnatic. The fact that he chased down the quadra kill, they're down 9,000 gold. Whippo also made an amazing play at the start of this fight, and then this is really just a matter of being able to close it out.
And the fun thing about this in particular was we were sitting back here talking about how Fnatic could still win this game. Like, the goal doesn't matter anymore. It's all about how you execute on those fights. But Fnatic, just like they have done throughout this series, failed to find the fights. They could fail to properly execute and set up the fights they want. And RNG were just like, okay, we'll play it steady, we'll play it calm. And this evolution of RNG almost seems unstoppable.
In an interesting way, that pentakill was kind of like the little smack to the face that RNG needed to say, okay, hold up. We can still lose this game, right? Let's slow it back down. Let's re-control the game. Let's recognize and remember what it's like to play at the highest level under this kind of pressure and actually close out the best of 5. They control the game. They pick up the buffs. They move in for the final fight, which happens inside Fnatic's base. Let's rewatch those last final moments.
And this was a setup where they had very slowly taken all of the outer inhibitors, and they were not going to hard commit without getting the pick first. This time, Caps is in front of the team instead of behind the team. They didn't have to dive through. That leaves no window for Whippo to have any disruption. And then even at this point, they're still willing to play it slow. Look how far back Uzi is for the majority of this fight.
When you listen to the mic checks from the LPL players, a lot of the time when they're coordinating fights, they repeat, slow the fight down, slow the fight down, go, 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 go. So it's very much about how they approach the tempo of the fight and deciding exactly when they're going to go for that killing blow rather than just ramming everything into it.
In an interesting way, it's like the least exciting fight to one of the most exciting series that we've watched. It's quite a way to close out a game, to be tempered all of a sudden and say, hey, let's make sure we lock it down.
But credit where credit is due. You can see that Fnatic did put up that fight. You can see it in Reckless's damage output. This is what people wanted to see from him. Change up your champion pool. Grab something that's more tournament meta, if you will, in the Ezreal. He got it all 3 times. He tried to do work. He got the pentakill. Unfortunately, it just wasn't enough.
It's just so frustrating as a European fan to watch them get all these early gold leads and then fail to transition them, but it just speaks to how well RNG have played this series, and I cannot wait to see what they can do in the final up against their opponents that are yet to be decided.
Before we get to RNG looking towards the final on Sunday, I want to put a capper on Fnatic. One of the things we talked about coming into the top of the day was the underperformance of a player, a star player like Reckless. He had his 2 highest DPM games of the tournament here today.
And I think he played with a lot of confidence in the laning phase today, which is something he's never really been able to do against Uzi. It was helped greatly by the fact that they first picked Ezreal all 3 games, and the fact that RNG was okay taking the Caitlyn into it, but it was different mentality from Reckless today for sure.
Yeah, and I don't want to flame Reckless. I think he had a decent tournament, definitely slumped in the very beginning. That said, on a power pick like Ezreal, your DPM is going to go up anyway. You're on a poke-based sort of champion, but looking at his positioning in the team fights, and it's not necessarily always on Reckless, maybe you also look at Hilly, there's just not quite the communication that you need to execute correctly. You said all the time about those Tahm Kench ults, or excuse me.
Yeah, I definitely think there was a desync between all of Fnatic in the way they were setting up team fights. Even the last final fight we saw there with Caps in the front, the Tahm Kench Ezreal was an extremely good example where they're getting dove by Vladimir, and Reckless is shifting and flashing away from his protection. So not everything's worked out.
I will say, though, that Whippo had a great series. Like, for a young player to come in and place Soaz, one of the big storylines we had throughout the playoffs was very much, can he fill the shoes of Soaz? And I felt like he's done a fantastic job.
But a lot of times, if we talk about this series coming down to the team fights, it's the experience, right? Knowing how to operate within the team fight, almost in second nature, right? Am I positioned next to the right person? Am I prioritizing the right person when it comes to my damage? For Fnatic, they fell short today. For RNG, they came up big with the 3-0, and it takes a lot to perform to the roars of the crowd on this big stage, and especially in front of this Parisian crowd. But one player in particular seemed unfazed by the pressure and earned himself player of the series. That player is Let Me in the top lane.
And it's about time, frankly, that the rest of RNG has shown up to Paris. Uzi has been the hard carry of this team all throughout groups, but finally, Let Me, Xiaohu, Karsa, they all stepped up, but Let Me, for me, was the game changer. His Vladimir in game #1, his Ornn in the following series, just constantly setting his team up and absorbing a lot of the pressure that Fnatic were throwing at him.
And for me, it was just the way in which he utilized flanks and the way in which he was able to maximize his teleport usage. You never felt like he was costing his team anything, and he was always in the right place at the right time.
And I think what's not shown here is the fact that his jungle proximity was incredibly mismatched. There was a large amount of resources that Broxa and even Caps spent to try and take Let Me out of the game. And put Whippo in an advantageous situation, and that was, what, 4 deaths in the entire series? So he did a great job.
All right, well, earlier we asked you to tweet out which champion picks you felt really swung the scales in this series, and here's what you had to say. First up, PTY Hendo thought it was all Caitlyn, specifically stating the fact she can dominate her lane so hard makes the game much harder for Fnatic.
I mean, yeah, I believe that to an extent. There was a tower that fell in that game around 8-9 minutes, and it certainly didn't help when they started snowballing Uzi. But ultimately, Uzi could have easily reached for the Kog'Maw there, which has been his champion of preference for this tournament. So I think it was simply that RNG were never strained. They never felt that they had to, you know, mix up the champion pool and find something that peaked a little bit earlier.
All right, next up, Princess Samiyano is convinced that the most OP pick was Xiaohu's Aurelia in game 1.
I will say, I think that he played the team fights beautifully, and his mechanics on the champion were pretty impressive. Do I think it was the deciding factor? Personally, no. I felt like Let Me's Vladimir had a much larger impact in those fights, but credit to Xiaohu bringing it out in front of such a big crowd on such a high-stake game. He performed extremely well.
Yeah, it's not easy to play Aurelia in these very chaotic team fights, especially when you're trying to dodge around a Tahm Kench. So a lot of guts to pull it out in the first game.
All right, Vedius, I think you'll like our next one here. Finally, Kramer Lediger feels Vladimir was the real tilter, having everything a pick needs to be an absolute menace.
I think it was really strong. I think Frost talked about it wonderfully earlier on, where he can fill both the roles of a side lane threat along with a teamfight champion. And if you utilize his flanks perfectly, he can be unstoppable.
He's also just a great flex pick for RNG themselves. Yes, it was Let Me who pulled it out in game number 1, but it was Xiao who grabbed it later on in the series. So I agree, and I think Fnatic is also aligned because they decided to ban it away.
Yeah, there wasn't much that Fnatic was doing against Vladimir, so it was smart to ban it in the last game, and a great pick for RNG.
Of course, we'll be curious to see which of these picks RNG decides to reserve for their series on Sunday, and of course, how teams who have watched this might respond to that in the draft.
Yeah, and I actually don't feel that confident about RNG going into the finals after this performance, depending on what they're showing. If it is true that they were just saying, okay, Caitlyn until they beat us, late game until they beat us, that's a good thing. But I've seen this play out a couple of different ways, and this could actually be their best card. They're saying, oh yeah, let's give red side, let's give Ezreal to either Prey or Betty. Let's give mid lane pressure over the other team because we'll get the crit scaling up until late game. They played like that at the start of MSI and lost a lot of games.
All right, go ahead.
I'm aligned there. I was also concerned, but the more that I think about it, the more that I feel that because they've shown the Kog'Maw on the earlier part of the split, or excuse me, the tournament, that they can quickly grab a different champion and pick a different window that they want to play in.
Taking a look at Flash Wolves and Kingzone, let's go ahead and put them into Fnatic's position in this series. Do you think those two teams are more capable of executing on the advantages that Fnatic built for themselves today and maybe actually challenge RNG in a best of 5?
Yes, I do. I also think that both teams have a few more options in terms of how they win the game. One of the big things that we said about Fnatic was you need caps on Aroma so that he can help his side lane wins. For Flash Wolves and Kingzone, you do not need your mid laner to help you win the side lane. Yes, it's one way in which you can play. We've seen it from BDD and Maple, but we know the bottom lanes of both these teams are extremely strong threats. You know you can always rely on Khan to be a split-pushing demon in the late game. I feel just like the number of options available for the second and third seed on the other side of the bracket are just so much wider, which means that if they get an early lead, they will be a lot scarier to deal with.
As well, I want to talk about Karsa. Again, we have to remember how little this guy has played on the MSI stage so far this tournament. Comes in here, starts for the first 2 games, and comes up big, especially in that second game in clutch moments to get the smite steals, kind of provide that momentum for the rest of his team. How are we looking at this guy as compared to MLXG forward towards Sunday?
So it completely changes the style of the team. Karsa more so plays towards the laners where he'll give a lot more attention to Xiao, who it's a bit more about the tracking, the calmness in the jungle, if you will, and also a different champion pool, more like the Skarners, the Zacs. He's a better Graves player, whereas when MLXG comes in, you know it's about to get spicy. He's going to get in your face, he's going to play the duelers like the Trundle, like the Olaf, and it's more so the team bending to his will. It's MLXG that's blitzing in and starting the play, and the rest of RNG collapsing around him or leaving him out to die, if you will, whereas Karsa is more like the insurance policy for RNG when they choose to pull the trigger.
Yeah, I think specifically against Fnatic with Caps being the primary carry, it was a smart start to have Karsa in, though, who's better at ganking mid lane because they didn't want Caps to take over the game. As they move towards the finals and they're up against either Flash Wolves or Kingzone, I think they'll still start him in game 1 so MLXG can get information, but I think they'll be much faster to put MLXG back in the game because that allows Uzi to play more aggressively, and that's their ultimate win condition.
All right, Vedius, we're saying that this is one of the closest 3-0 sweeps we've seen, so I want to know what the learnings here for RNG, beyond just, hey, maybe play a little bit cleaner, especially when you're looking forward at these other 2 squads that they might go up against. What needs to be retooled and worked on between now and Sunday to guarantee that the LPL walks away with the title of MSI champions?
Well, I think that relying on late game team fights isn't a super effective strategy. I know Jat talked a little bit about it earlier, and I think that if you're drafting Karsa, while we did see a lot of strong early game performances from him, we know that teams like Flash Wolves and Kingzone just seem to be that much more effective at finding those early leads. The interesting thing, though, is when we watched RNG in the group stages play up against these teams, they were still able to find these early game leads. So I think it's simply a matter of, in terms of learnings, I don't know if there are a huge amount because I know that RNG have these available options to them. It's about whether or not in the time, in terms of their preparation, they just decided Fnatic can't close games, so we're just going to rely on a late game strat.
Well, they've got a day to rest and scout their opponents. With RNG promoting to the finals, the only thing left to do is to see who they'll face. We return tomorrow for our last semifinal match as the Flash Wolves from the LMS look to take down the LCK's Kingzone. That's going to do it, though, for us here today. So for myself, the casters, and the entire live broadcast crew, thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow for more MSI 2018.
going to get better from here as we jump into Summoner's Rift to decide who gets to go on to the final here in only a couple of days. TP's completed, Xiaohu and Uzi both decide to show up. It's going to be big, it's going to be a party! Lemme coming in from the flank, that's going to be big onto the back line as Reckless tries to get himself away. Going to be taken down before he can as Proxa tries to get some revenge. The peel is not enough, and the killing spree for RNG is only going to get better from here. Xiaohu taken low, but it's a double kill for Uzi. It's a double kill for Xiaohu, and that is going to be the ace.
Vladimir is here.
Oh, Xiaohu shows up at just the right time. You couldn't have done that better if you tried. Into the pink goes Karsa. Baron going to be taken down below one. And Karsa steals away Fnatic. But it's disaster. Not going to be Hillistang with the flash to keep the AD carry alive. But RNG is just too much. 5 man strong. Still in the base. They'll take down Fnatic for a second time. Big and Uzi have to retreat from this one. Caps and Proxa showing up. MLXG looking to come in from behind. Tom Kentralty goes through, still looking to make the plays. Caps over the ball, going to be chased down. Hillistang trying to back himself away. Proxa looking to go for a pull, can't quite find it. 2 already dead. Reckless, oh, make it 3. Reckless has no way away from Uzi. He's got to look for trying to get away from this one. Surely there's no way out. A Quadra. Let me wanting to get away, but that should not happen. Proxa wants to provide the CC. Into the fight as they proc the GA onto MLXG. He's going to look to be taken down here, but instead the damage comes through. Fnatic's members will fall.